Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, Rachel. And a big thanks to GCC for having me here today and for the good work you all are doing to spread more compassion around the globe. And thank you to everyone who's joining. I recognize so many of these faces and really appreciate those of you making the time to be here for this session. It's a gift to me to be able to share about forgiveness. It's something that's, deeply transformed my life. So I've been really looking forward to this session together. And what I'd like to do in the time we have today is first to share some of my understandings about forgiveness. And they're largely coming from my own personal journey and my work with people over the years, as well as from some of the research that's been done on forgiveness, especially trying to debunk some of the myths that we carry about what forgiveness is. And then after that, I want to guide all of us through a forgiveness practice. And then towards the end, Christine and I will open it up for questions and discussions, and would love to hear from some of you. So I thought I'd begin our exploration today just by sharing a few words of wisdom that come from one of the most touching books I've ever read on forgiveness. I'm sure some of you have heard about it. It's called The Book of Forgiving, and it was written by Bishop Desmond Tutu and his daughter Empo. Bishop Tutu was made the chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a commission that was set up to help the people of South Africa find forgiveness amidst the atrocities and the injustices they suffered under apartheid. And he and his daughter wrote this book really to share what they learned through that process. So I just want to read you a few words from the introduction, because to me it really speaks to the heart of what forgiveness is about. They say, "We'd like to share with you two simple truths. There's nothing that cannot be forgiven, and there's no one undeserving of forgiveness. When we can see that we are all bound to one another, whether by birth, circumstance, or simply by our shared humanity, then we will know this to be true. There have been many times when each of us has needed to forgive. There have also been many times when each and every one of us has needed to be forgiven. And there will be many times again. In our own ways, we are all broken. And out of that brokenness, we hurt others. Forgiveness is the journey we take towards healing those broken parts. Forgiveness is how we become whole again." I love that last line. Forgiveness is how we become whole again. And so one way that we can think about forgiveness today is to see it as an act of compassion, meaning a way that we can respond compassionately to the pain, to the hurt, to what Bishop Tutu called the brokenness, or heartbreak that we all face as part of being human. We've all lived long enough to know that life includes both joy and pain. Everyone here has most likely, like me, been hurt at some point, perhaps even by someone we love or trusted. And there's lots of ways that we can respond as humans to those hurts throughout our life. Some of those ways are more transformative and helpful, and some of those ways are more unhealthy, we could call it. The APA, the American Psychological Association, defines forgiveness as the conscious choice to release resentment toward a person or a group that has hurt us. Often when we're hurt, we don't respond consciously. We most of the time respond in more what we would call reactive ways. We might want others to hurt the way we're hurting. We might seek revenge. If we've had our hearts broken, we might make a decision to shut our heart down, saying, no, it's not worth loving someone like that again. So there's many what we could call more unskillful ways that we as human beings respond to our hurts and pains. Forgiveness gives us another way, a much more transformative and skillful way that allows us to respond to those moments of hurt with compassion. So how do we actually do this is a question I get asked a lot. And in my work over the years, both with myself and others, Christine, could you mute? I'm hearing a bit of background noise. I don't know. Oh, perfect. You know, in everything I've read about forgiveness and all of the work I've done, both on myself and with others, there's kind of three basic components to the process of forgiveness. And I thought with our time today, I could walk us through each of these briefly, and then we'll get to practice them. So the first component of forgiveness is actually compassion for ourselves. In order to really forgive another, we need to first deal with our own hurt and the pain that was caused. So forgiveness, the process of forgiveness, always includes a deep recognition of the harm that was done and the pain that we're feeling as a result. You know, most of us aren't taught how to really be with our own pain, especially in those moments where we've been hurt. On top of that, we know we're also biologically wired to move away from pain. And so this first component of self-compassion for many people is quite challenging at first. But through this practice of self-compassion, learning to stay with ourselves in our most vulnerable moments of hurt or grief, sadness, even anger, to not turn away from ourselves in the midst of those feelings and to allow ourselves to actually touch in and feel those vulnerable places is what makes forgiveness possible. I know from direct experience, this is much easier said than done. For most of us, it takes a deliberate practice to learn to be with ourselves in this way. You know, many of us learned at a very young age to dismiss or diminish our hurts, to push our feelings away. Some of us were talked out of what we were feeling. And many people judge themselves for feeling the way they're feeling. You know, we can tell ourselves at times, oh, it's not that big a deal. You know, why are you getting so upset over this? Just get over it. And all of that comes from this very natural human instinct to protect ourselves from pain. But that strategy doesn't work so well when it comes to forgiveness. In the book of Forgiving, the authors share that when we deny our feelings, when we choose not to feel our hurts and reject our pain, we always end up seeking destruction. It may be self-destruction or the hope that hurting others will fix our pain. Reclaiming our ability to feel is essential for forgiveness. And so that's really the first step in the forgiveness process, this step of self-compassion, this capacity to recognize, turn towards, and feel the hurt that was caused. I like to say, when we can feel it, we can free it. And that then leads us quite naturally to the second component of forgiveness, which is compassion for the other. This capacity to also recognize and empathize with the pain or suffering of the other person. I know that that can be quite challenging, especially when we feel deeply hurt by someone. There may be a part of us that says, no, I don't want to empathize with that person. You know, I'm hurting. And that's why this first component of self-compassion is so important. And from my own experience, has to happen first. You know, once we're able to really find that authentic compassion for ourselves, to tend to our own wounds, so to speak, we have a much greater capacity to then include the other person's pain. And I have to say, the research on forgiveness over the past few decades has been pretty clear on the second component. Studies have shown again and again that our capacity to empathize with the person that hurt us is one of the key factors that actually helps us forgive. And so this is a good moment to pause and talk about some of the false ideas that we hold about this aspect of forgiveness. Because if we don't understand the distinction of what it means to forgive, it can actually block our capacity to forgive. So one of the biggest barriers that comes up on the journey to forgiveness is this false idea that if I empathize with that other person, if I offer compassion and forgiveness to that person who hurt me, aren't I somehow excusing or minimizing their harmful behavior? Aren't I somehow condoning what they did, making it okay? It's really important to distinguish forgiveness from excusing or condoning harmful behavior. They're not the same thing. As I shared earlier, the first component of any forgiveness process is a deep recognition of the hurt that was caused. So forgiveness doesn't deny, doesn't forget, doesn't excuse what happened. Nor does forgiveness mean that we need to love or befriend or even reconcile with the person that hurt us. That's another misunderstanding. There might be people in our own life who we can forgive, while at the same time we need to put up a boundary with that person. Or maybe we even need to remove ourselves from the relationship with them, especially if it's harmful to us. So we can forgive, which is an inner experience, while at the same time choosing to not engage with the person and to stand up against unhealthy or harmful behavior. In that sense, forgiveness is different from reconciliation. Reconciliation is a much more complex process that requires both parties to do the work to heal and reestablish a relationship that's been damaged. I like to say forgiveness is about me and reconciliation is about we. So forgiveness doesn't mean we release the person from accountability, even in some cases legal accountability, like in the case of a divorce. Forgiveness is different than justice. So how do we navigate this second component of forgiveness and find compassion for someone who has hurt us, maybe even hurt us really deeply? Through compassion practices, we actually have the capacity to cultivate a way of relating to the person, even the person that hurt us, and see them as a fellow human being who is also hurting themselves. Again, this doesn't condone or excuse their behavior, but it does help us place it in a bigger and much more transformative context. You know, once we've gone through that first step of self-compassion, we can then begin to consider the other person from a much wider view. What I mean by that is we can kind of zoom out from just focusing on what they did to us and begin to reflect on and consider what might have made them act this way. You know, what was going on for them? Were they somehow distressed or triggered or overwhelmed? And even bigger than that, you know, how might their own context, their own past, their own history, their own wounds and traumas have contributed to the way they acted? What other factors might have been at play when they did or said whatever they did or said that hurt us? There's that famous saying, hurt people hurt people. And we can see this if we're honest and humble enough. We can also see this with ourselves, right? We can look at times, I can look at times in my own life when I've hurt someone. You know, maybe we hurt someone with our words, we make an insensitive comment to a family member, or we're overly critical to someone at work, or maybe we just haven't shown up for a friend when they really needed us. And when we really look at ourselves during those times, we most of the time discover that in those moments when we lashed out or were insensitive, it was because we ourselves were hurting, overwhelmed, maybe under stress. Again, that doesn't condone our actions either, but it does bring about a much more compassionate way to hold ourselves in those times in our life when we make mistakes and cause pain. So through compassion, we can cultivate this capacity in the second component of forgiveness to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, to literally practice opening up to their humanness. And as we do that, we start to understand that behind that harmful behavior is a human being who's suffering. And when we can recognize that, even for a moment, we experience what's known in the compassion world as common humanity. We experience that at the most fundamental level, that person who hurt us is just another limited, wounded human who, just like me, at times is in pain, and out of that pain causes pain. And when we experience this recognition of common humanity, when we experience it in our hearts, there's a deep opening that often, almost always, brings forth a sense of compassion and forgiveness towards that person. Now, of course, with the difficult people in our lives and in our world, this might be a forever practice. So that's the second component of forgiveness, compassion for the other. And once we've spent time and practice with both of those components, compassion for self, compassion for other, then this third component of forgiveness opens up, which is the definition you often hear. The definition I read you from the American Psychological Association, which is that forgiveness is also a conscious choice to release the feelings of unforgiveness, right? Those feelings of bitterness, resentment, that ill will that we can hold towards that person. We can, after practicing compassion for self and compassion for other, we can intentionally choose to release those feelings of unforgiveness from our own hearts and replace them with feelings of understanding, compassion, and forgiveness itself. So what does that actually look like? I often get asked to release, what do you mean release these feelings of resentment? So in any painful experience, and you can think about your own time, maybe even a recent time or time in your past where you were hurt, often there's the original pain, the original hurt. And then over time, we build up a lot on top of that hurt, a lot of resentment. And those are actually two different things, but often in our inner experience, they're so collapsed that we don't recognize the difference. So take, for example, maybe a family member or a friend makes a comment that stings or hurts our feelings. There's sort of like that original ouch, that original feeling of sadness or pain that's there. And then around that pain, as time goes on, it's almost like these bricks, I call them, these bricks of resentment towards that person or that situation start to form. They may be bricks of judgment, bricks of blame. They may be bricks of revenge. Even over time, there can be bricks of hatred that start building up. We may even start to make that person the enemy in our heart. And before we know it, there's a part of our heart that's literally walled off from all of these bricks, that kind of shuts down, burdened, under the weight of all of this resentment. And so one way to think about this third component is that we make a deliberate choice to release those added bricks of resentment, either towards the other, if we're forgiving another, or sometimes even towards ourself, to let go of that extreme self-judgment we carry, or that shame we carry towards ourself, or the revenge and bitterness that we may carry towards another. That's what gets released in this third component of forgiveness. As Bishop Tutu said in the book, I need to forgive so that my anger, resentment, and lust for revenge doesn't corrode my own being. That is what gets released through forgiveness, that place of anger and resentment that's, in a sense, corroding our own heart, our own being. And in this way, we could think about forgiveness as something that's in service of our own healing, our own transformation. It's a way to literally liberate ourselves and our hearts from that unhealthy energy of unforgiveness. And the research over the past 30, 40 years shows this to be true. In study after study, forgiveness practice not only helped people forgive, which it did, but it also produced incredible reductions in things like depression, anxiety, stress, blood pressure. And it increases people's sense of well-being physically, emotionally, spiritually, across the board. Forgiveness at times can seem just like the medicine that we need to take. You know, sometimes the medicine doesn't taste good. Sometimes it's hard to do it, just like sometimes it's hard to practice forgiveness. And yet when we do it, it is so good for us, and it feels so good for us on all levels. You know, forgiveness literally, I've seen it with myself and so many people I've worked with over the decades. Forgiveness literally can transform our life and our relationships, not only with ourselves, with others, with the world. And more than anything, forgiveness can help us walk through this world that has pain as part of it, in a way that can keep our hearts open and wide, even in the midst of the brokenness that we encounter at times. So one quick thing I want to share that's helped me and some of the people I've worked with on this journey of forgiveness is to think about forgiveness both as a practice and as a process. What do I mean by that? So we can engage in very deliberate practices that cultivate this capacity of forgiveness inside us, much like the one we're going to do in just a few minutes today. And each time we do these practices, you could think of it like building the muscle of forgiveness, literally creating the conditions within us that incline us more towards forgiveness and less towards revenge, right? We know as human beings, we have both of those instincts hardwired into us for survival. And the practice of forgiveness leans us away from that instinct of revenge and more toward that instinct of compassion and forgiveness. And this is a practice that we can do, much like going to the gym and building a muscle. So that is true. And what is also equally true is that even though forgiveness is a practice and the conditions can be cultivated within us, it's also a process. It's a process that has its own timing, its own wisdom, and it can't be forced, it can't be rushed, and it can't be pushed on us or another person. Forgiveness is ultimately a choice. Nobody has to forgive. And I can just say in my own experience and my work with people over the years, I've seen time and again, forgiveness happens when we're ready, willing, and ultimately able to forgive. So we need to approach this as something, if we're interested in forgiveness, we can approach this as something we're interested in, dedicated to, and engage in those practices while at the same time trusting this greater process of forgiveness to unfold in its own timing. So before we enter into our practice of forgiveness today, I wanted to just take a couple minutes and share with you a personal story from my own life about the power of forgiveness. I find that stories can help us in making these teachings seem more real. So I hope in sharing something personal with you today that it helps you see in a real life way how these three components of forgiveness happen. So those of you that know me, some of you know about 18 years ago, I left my marriage. And because I was the one who made that decision to leave, I felt a lot of guilt, especially at the beginning of our separation. My ex-husband and I, my husband and I at the time had a child together. He is a person who has neurological challenges, and I felt incredible guilt about putting my son, 2 years old at the time, through the experience of a divorce. And I also, my husband at the time, we were teaching a lot of transformational workshops together, and I felt a tremendous amount of guilt and self-judgment that, oh my gosh, we're teaching this stuff, and I still can't make this marriage work. So I was carrying around what I termed at the time this mountain of guilt. And I remember, especially in that first year of our separation, I so desperately wanted my ex to forgive me. I wanted this feeling of guilt to be lifted, to be taken from me. And so I threw myself into the practices of forgiveness. I read lots of books. I went to workshops. I did self-forgiveness meditations. I tried anything, literally, I could get my hands on to help me feel forgiven. And I just couldn't seem to do it. I just couldn't seem to shake this feeling of guilt that was weighing over my heart. And about a year into this process, I went on a retreat, and it was during that retreat where I had if I'm really honest, I had my first real experience of those two components of forgiveness that I shared with you earlier. And during the retreat, probably for the first time through the whole divorce, I was finally able to feel the pain that I'd caused my ex-husband. I was able to sort of put myself into his shoes and imagine and try to feel his hurt without my own usual justifications, without my excuses, without my rationale for what I'd done or why I'd done it. It was almost like all of that was set aside, and I was finally ready, willing, and able to feel the experience of his pain. And even those feelings of guilt that I had been carrying around, I recognized in this process that in some way that guilt was a subtle form of protection. What I mean by that is, in a way, it was easier for me to feel guilty about, to feel badly about what I'd done. But that was very different than actually feeling what I'd done, feeling the hurt, feeling the impact, feeling the sadness and pain that my actions caused. And when I was able to finally do that, it also miraculously opened me up to feeling my own pain. I was finally able to feel my own hurt, and in a way to feel what was going on during the marriage that led even to some of my own unskillful behavior in leaving so quickly. And I remember at one point in this process, I was feeling my ex's pain, feeling my own pain, and after some time, there was no more distinction anymore. All that was left was this feeling of common humanity that I talked to you about earlier, this deep sense that we were both just two hurting human beings who, out of that hurt, acted in ways that hurt each other. And when I felt that feeling of common humanity, it didn't condone and it didn't erase the pain that had happened. But again, it put it in this much wider context where this sense of forgiving and being forgiven actually just happened on their own. And all of that guilt, that mountain of guilt that I'd been carrying around for that first year, was released. And this feeling of great liberation took its place. And it's actually like a lot of people describe in books about forgiveness. And I understood it then experientially, maybe for the first time, that forgiveness truly is an inside job. You know, my ex wasn't there on that retreat. He hadn't said or done anything. And yet, this profound healing of forgiving and being forgiven had taken place in my own skin. And I felt suddenly released from that prison. And that experience dramatically changed my life. Really, from that moment on, the way I worked with myself and people was radically different. So thank you for bearing with me for those few minutes and listening to that story. I know we all have probably a story like that has shifted our relationship to forgiveness and informed maybe how we understand forgiveness in a bigger or deeper way. So we can talk, and read books and learn about the science and have information about forgiveness, but none of that is actually the experience of forgiveness. So what I'd like to spend some time now on is going through a forgiveness practice together with all of you, and opening up even just a little bit today to this experience of forgiveness. And for the purpose of practice, I want to encourage all of us here today to start with something easy. Think about forgiveness practice the way we would think about going to the gym. If we were training our muscle at the gym, we don't go to the gym and pick up the heaviest weight in the training room, right? We start with a lighter weight and we work our way up. And the same is true with practices of forgiveness. So I want to invite you to think about someone in your life who you could imagine that is easy for you to love and who you want to practice forgiving. And if you want to choose yourself for this practice and use this practice to work with self-forgiveness, you can do that too. And for the purpose of practice, I want to invite you to think about one specific hurt that you'd like to work with today. Again, not your biggest pain or the most difficult person, but somebody you love, somebody that's easy for you to forgive, and then one specific hurt. Everett Worthington, who's one of the premier researchers on forgiveness, says we learn forgiveness by practicing forgiving one hurt at a time. So think about that hurt. And I also want to say, just before I guide you into this, let's take any pressure off ourselves that we have to arrive at forgiveness today, remembering that it's a practice and a process. And we might have to return to this person and even this mild hurt many times before we truly feel forgiveness. And that's okay. We're simply practicing. We're simply lifting that weight today, building that muscle, cultivating the seeds of forgiveness, and trusting that they will bloom when they're ready. So as a way to begin, I'll invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, or perhaps just direct your gaze downward onto your own body for practice. And to start this practice, I want to encourage all of us to connect to our own compassionate heart. You could literally rest your attention on your actual heart center, or find another spot in your body where you feel connected to your own inbuilt capacity for compassion. Just taking a few breaths into that area. And if it's helpful, you can even place a hand on that part of your body, as if to connect to this natural inbuilt capacity for compassion that all of us have as human beings. As you breathe into that part of your body, allow yourself to also connect to the qualities of your own heart, those qualities of kindness, love, generosity, all of those qualities of goodness that are already part of who we are. And as you connect to those qualities, see what it feels like at an experiential level to open to your own compassionate heart. It might feel warm or expanded. It might feel calm. There may be a sense of light. Just notice what's present as you stay connected to this heart center. And we're going to begin this practice of forgiveness now. Staying connected to this compassionate heart, I want to invite you to bring to mind the situation, the person that you want to practice forgiving. And for the first step in the practice, I want to invite you to bring the part of you that is hurt by that person, by what they said, what they did. Bring that part of you that is hurt right into the center of your own compassionate heart, as if you hold that part of you that's hurting. And to the degree you're able to, allow yourself just for a moment to feel into that hurt. Almost as if you reach out your hand to the part of you that's hurting and allow yourself to meet it, to soften your heart towards those feelings. You could even imagine that your own compassionate heart can tell the part of you that's hurting, I see you. I feel you. I'm here with you. Taking a breath and allowing yourself to soften a moment more into those feelings. And if at any point those feelings feel like they're too much, you can just come back to bringing your attention onto your own compassionate heart. Reconnecting to those qualities of your own heart's goodness, the warmth, and when you feel grounded, one more time, going back to the part of you that's hurting and sending that part of you a couple of gentle breaths and this message. Again, as if you could extend a hand and allow yourself to let that part of you know, I see you. I feel you. And I'm here with you. Allowing that part of you that is hurting to feel and know that it's held by this wider, deeper, and expanded heart of compassion. Taking one more breath in with that as we gently now move to the next step in the practice. And if you're ready, into that same heart of compassion, see if you can call to mind the person that you're trying to forgive. Allowing yourself to see this person in their humanity for a moment. seeing them bigger than just the person that hurt you. Allow yourself to recognize them as a human being who has their own pain, their own challenges, their own stress and suffering. Imagine them for a moment like a little child before they ever hurt you, before they ever hurt anyone. Like you, they came into this existence vulnerable, needing love, needing healthy attention. And just like you, somewhere along the way, they too were hurt themselves. And as we engage now in the practice of offering them forgiveness, remembering one more time that forgiving doesn't mean excusing or condoning what they did. Forgiving is simply an act of releasing our negative energy towards that person. And so we'll be doing that through the practice of offering some common forgiveness phrases. And just trust what feels true for you today. You can practice offering one of these phrases or all of these phrases. And if you can't offer these phrases today, know you can come back to this practice as many times as you need. And so holding that person in your own compassionate heart, I will speak these phrases, and to the degree it feels right, you can practice repeating them, whispering them, offering them to this person. Here are the phrases of forgiveness. I see you and your suffering. I also see and feel the pain that you've caused me. Just as I am willing to allow myself to be imperfect, I also can allow you to be imperfect. I also can allow you to make mistakes. I also can allow you to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. Just like you, I can cause pain when I'm in pain. I forgive you, releasing the energy of resentment and ill will. If I can't forgive you today, may I forgive you sometime in the future. Taking a breath here into your own heart and sensing that energy of unforgiveness that you may have been carrying a long time. And see, feel, and stay true to yourself. If it's ready to release today, we're going to practice repeating the last two phrases of the forgiveness practice one final time. I forgive you I release the energy of resentment and ill will. If I can't forgive you today, may I forgive you sometime in the future. Taking a deeper breath here as we start to transition out of this practice. Sense one last time your own compassionate heart, recognizing that you did the best you could in this forgiveness practice today. And that's all we can ever do. Allowing yourself, as we complete this practice, to be held in your own heart's compassion. Taking one deeper breath here to complete that practice. And gently, if your eyes were closed, opening your eyes again. Returning when you're ready to the screen. And looking around at the people that have gathered here who, just like you, are interested in and willing to practice forgiveness. It always gives me great hope to be in a community of people who are willing and courageous enough to engage in these practices. So may your own hope, may your own hearts be inspired by each other today. And Christine and I are going to open it up now for any questions that may have come up for you about forgiveness, or anything you want to share about what you're taking from that forgiveness practice, or anything else. You know, our experience and understanding of forgiveness is enriched by each other. So if you would like to share something, you can either raise your hand or put your hand icon on there. And I'm going to put myself, I don't know if I can I put myself, oh yeah, in gallery view. Let me do that so I can see you. There you all are. Yeah. Archana, please come off mute. So lovely to have you here with us today.
Neelama, this was so great. I was just thinking through the whole practice, the steps you talked about, the structure you gave to the whole practice of forgiveness actually is giving me goosebumps. It is so healing. I'm telling you, I practice compassion, but whenever I hear you or Robert or Monica, the steps you lay out as like a carpet before me is just so wonderful, so healing. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Archana. You walked down that carpet, so thank you for, your own good heart's commitment to this practice. Thank you, thank you. Belinda, hello, dear one.
Hello, and thank you, Christine and Neelama and dear Robert. It is so wonderful to see my ACT mentors and teachers and my dear friend Panucia from Europe. So I think you know, Neelama, that when we did forgiveness in the ACT program, I took pictures of my notes from your class on forgiveness, and I kept them on my phone. And it was exceptionally valuable. I recommend it. And that produced so much forgiveness and experience in so many ways in my life. And I am now facing one that is a biggie. And it's in the context of professional. And so I find myself resonating with each of the beautiful, beautiful things that you've just taken us through. And yet, and perhaps this is a discussion for a different day with you or Christine, but so I don't want to take up everyone's time. But I'm finding myself somewhat flummoxed on the professional aspect of it. It's different, I have found. And even what I thought was going to be the most difficult family member ever, it wasn't. And it was a release. And so it wasn't a forever practice, which I drew a little hard around. This one's turning out to be kind of a forever thing. And I'm not making much headway.
Yeah, you know, we have these individuals in our life. For some of us, it's our personal life. For some of us, our professional life. For some of us, it's our world leaders, you know, what we might call the difficult person. And maybe we could talk offline, Belinda, because for that, it does take time and it does take practice to, you know, unravel this and you know, and especially in a professional setting, because again, it doesn't mean that you need to have a kumbaya moment with this person at work. That's not what forgiveness is. It's an inner experience of releasing my ill will towards them, right? We can do that while still doing what we need to do professionally. So, but yes, this sounds like for you a bigger issue that maybe is beyond the scope of today. But please reach out to me.
Okay.
And I'm happy to
Thank you.
support you with it. Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
So
you.
I see three more people, and I'm going to just call on them in order. I see Jean, Jeff, and Heidi. So Jean, if you would come off mute. So lovely to see you.
Good to see you. Okay, I think my system isn't working, so I'm going to be succinct, which is rare. I'm going to keep it, and I can feel inside of myself the piece that's missing for me is I want them to hurt. No, erase that. I want them to care that they have hurt me. And a lot of times they aren't going to care that they have hurt me.
Right.
Did you hear that okay?
I could. I want them to care that they hurt me. I want them to, you know, feel remorse, ideally apologize, right? It's so human to want all of those things, right? This is like, of course we would want all of those things. And the teaching here is that forgiveness doesn't depend on all of those things. It would be really nice to have those things. You could even say it might make it easier if the person was able to do that. But often, and this is where the second component of forgiveness is so important, often the person is in their own prison of their own pain. They're taken over by their own trigger. Their brain has been hijacked to such a degree that they don't have capacity. It's a higher level capacity for someone to care about what they've done to us. It's a higher level capacity for us to admit, oh yeah, I messed up. I am so sorry. This doesn't come from our primitive brain. It comes from a more mature part of the brain. And when someone themselves is suffering, they don't have access to the capacities that would allow that. That's what we come to recognize in the second component of forgiveness that allows us to release them. So thank you, Jean. It's
that makes sense. And and I can say, okay, so I don't have to take it personally. It's not because they're hating me. It's they're hijacked.
They're hijacked.
I mean, they might be hating me too, but
right. Their deepest heart isn't made to hate you or anyone. But when we're hijacked, we're flooded with hatred. Yeah. So that is a way to frame it. Thank you. Jeff, you've got the mic.
I've got the mic. So I just wanted to share a way that I started thinking about this that was helpful. And that is that I confess to myself that I might have unrealistic expectations for some individuals. I expect someone to respond to my emails in a certain period of time, and if they don't, they have not met my expectations, all the way up to a family member hurting me deeply, and realizing that I have expectations for them that I'm going to be a priority that perhaps they may not be able to make me. And I can separate the resentment from that and just recognize that I need to reevaluate that situation. And it completely brings me back to self-compassion, because I have to feel compassion for myself, because I know that I have let people down who have expectations that I can't meet. So when I think about it that way, I have to have self-compassion, and I have to have compassion for them because they have their own demons and battles and challenges. And to your point, I might have to reevaluate the ways I let them or don't let them into my life, which seems like I'm not forgiving them. I am forgiving them. I'm just having to reassess my expectations, lower my expectations, put up those barriers, not have them quite as much in my life for self-protection, and take the emotion out of it. So anyway, that has been helpful for me to kind of think along those lines.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And if we had more time, I would comment on all that. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to say thank you for sharing your wisdom with the group. Amen. Yes. Heidi and then Evangeline, you have the last word, just because I'm seeing we're at the top of the hour here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. First, just a quick comment on what Jean said. I was thinking that, and I said, oh, this is a great way to, and what you commented on, it's a great way to deal with dead people because they can't say anything. Now, my second thing is I mentioned this workshop to a dear friend down in very eastern northern Florida. And she said, Heidi, that's fine for you up in Boston, but we can't do this down here because of the polarity. And I'm wondering, so since this country is so polarized and the whole world is so polarized, how do we even begin when someone seems to and feels to be so opposite and so closed down? How do we be and begin to just a tiny bit open up?
I believe we do it by the kind of practice we just did, right? I really think forgiveness and compassion, and that's why this organization doing the work they're doing in the world, for example, it's only through our ability to recognize the common human being over there that we're going to get through this polarity. It's the only, for me, I know it sounds extreme to say it, I think the only way through is what is fundamental and common to us. All day long we hear about what's different. All day long we hear about that other group, that other person, that other religion, that other sexual identity. All day long we hear about the level of differences. There are differences that can't be denied, and these practices of compassion and forgiveness distill us down to our most basic human elements, which are the same. No matter our race, no matter our religion, no matter our political persuasion, we have basic human qualities. We want the same thing. We want to feel safe. We want to feel loved. We want to belong. And when we can distill down with someone who's so polar opposite to us, it doesn't mean we have to vote for that person. It doesn't mean we have to join that group. But when we can still down to the sameness, that is the way forward through this extreme polarity. I know no other way right now than that way. Evangeline, thank you, Heidi. Evangeline, you have the last word.
Thank you, Neelama. I just want to speak to the power of this work that Neelama shared with us today. Almost 13 years ago, Neelama and her ex-husband were doing a weekend on this forgiveness process, and my husband had just left me 2 weeks before, and I begged him to attend with me. And it's like this little miracle happened that day, because the part of the process where I was able to go into feeling his pain on such really embodying where he was coming from that I never really understood before. It was like this instant forgiveness. And often there's these workshop highs and you feel really good, and then you go back and real life happens. Honestly, I forgave him that day, and it was done, and we transformed to a very beautiful friendship. And it's this process that made such a difference. And I still talk about it a lot to people when I'm trying to help them through their battles. So thank you, Neelama, so much.
Thank you, Evangeline, and thank you to everyone for engaging in this practice, and to you, Rachel and Christine. I'm sorry I went over time here. I
Totally
try.
fine. It happens a lot.
Okay, good. I can forgive myself.
Thank you so much. You can forgive yourself, and everyone is still here listening. It's beautiful when people can share personal stories, like you said earlier. And I'll share really quick, if you don't mind, that
Yes.
I love forgiveness because the self part is often left out. People often think it's something you do for someone else and not for yourself. And it kind of makes me think of, in Buddhism, the first dart versus the second dart. Like the first dart that hits you is the unavoidable pain, like the pain of something that someone did to you. You can't control that. Someone hurt you. And then the second dart is all of the feelings of resentment or ill will towards that person that's hurt us. The second dart that makes us suffer unnecessarily. And forgiveness is kind of that like antidote to that second dart. Like we take it out and it heals. And you'll always still potentially have the pain of the first dart, but it'll be much less suffering than if you held on to that negative pain that happened with the second dart. So thank you. It was beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Christine. That's such a beautiful metaphor and way to distill it all so eloquently. Thank you.
And I put Neelama's website, LinkedIn, in the chat if anyone wants to connect with her, reach out to her. Also put a link to future GCC events if anyone's interested. And it's just so nice to see everyone here. And thank you so much, Neelama, for sharing your wisdom and your time with us, and just everyone else for being open to sharing as well. It's beautiful when we can all connect in this space together.
Thank you all for being here and doing these practices. Thank you, GCC. Thank you, Rachel and Christine.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bellissima Neelama. Bellissima.
Grazie, Roberto. Grazie. Bye, friends.
Bye, everyone. So good to see you all.
See you in Italy.
Come, everyone, come. All right. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Reminds me of what you guys have said in